Okay, so welcome back. So one thing I want to say, based on the previous videos and all these pictures and taking all these trig functions and dealing with the reference angle and the required angle and things like that. So what are we talking about? So I want to be clear that when you're doing problems, there's going to be what's called the required angle. The required angle is the angle that they need to solve the problem, right? Depending on the context of the problem. And the other one is the reference angle. The reference angle is what's used to find the value using the trig functions, right? So in every case, except for when cosine is negative, your calculator will give you the reference angle. So it's a good idea that we can start by finding the reference angle, and then from there we can find the angle that's required by the problem. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Now, so in this case, let me write down some of the formulas that are going to be helpful. So in this case, I'm going to use alpha to represent the reference angle. Theta is going to represent the required angle. So if we're in the first quadrant, how should I want to set this table up? Yeah, okay. So if we're in the first quadrant, so we've got quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Okay? And so if we're in the first quadrant, then that's easy. The reference angle is equal to the required angle. So theta, which is the required angle, is going to be the same as the reference angle. Okay? Now, what about quadrant 2? Well, if you're in quadrant 2, then theta, the required angle, is just going to be 180 minus the reference angle. So theta is equal to 180 degrees minus whatever the reference angle is. Okay, that's if you're in the second quadrant. Okay, if you're in the third quadrant, then it's going to be 180 plus alpha. Right now you're in the second quadrant, so again you're going to be at least 180 degrees, right? So let's draw this again. Let's have a visual here. Okay, so again, if you're in the first quadrant, then everything's fine. Your angle, your required angle is the same as your reference angle, right? In the second quadrant, your required angle theta is just going to be 180 minus your reference angle. So again, if you're, let's start here at the first quadrant. Oops. So if we're here in the first quadrant, boom, right? If we're in the first quadrant, well, that's easy. Your reference angle is equal to your required angle. Okay, great. So that's quadrant 1. Okay, what if you're in quadrant 2? Well, let's say you're here. Now, your reference angle is alpha here, and theta is your required angle. Well, how do you get theta? Easy. You take your 180 minus alpha, right? You're taking 180 degrees minus alpha. That gives you theta. Okay? Now, what about in the third quadrant? Okay, now we're just going to draw our line in the third quadrant. So now our reference angle is here, right? The reference angle always makes the angle between the x-axis and the terminal side. So now alpha, our reference angle, is here. So now what is our theta then? Remember, theta is our required angle. So here we're going to do 180 plus alpha. Okay, so you can easily kind of derive these by thinking about this. So our required angle theta is now going to be 180 plus our reference angle. And then finally, if we're in the fourth quadrant, so now, here we are. And now alpha is this angle, so our reference angle is there. And so, in this case, how do we find our required angle? Theta. Well, in this case, well, guess what? It's just going to be a whole revolution, which is 360 degrees minus alpha. So, and I think I alluded to this in a previous video, but I didn't really come out and say it. But theta, in this case, our required angle is just going to be 360 minus alpha. Okay, so there's the convenient formulas that we can use to find the required angle. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and do some examples and see how we can use these. Thanks.